in Japan and a team in the UK, and we had a really nice, fruitful collaboration. The aims of the project were to link the tutorial English program that is English speaking communication program to the CFR and to review all course materials and course components in order to suggest how the course can be improved. The motivation behind the project was to enhance synergies between learning, teaching, and assessment, as Fergus just talked about. Yeah. And following the underlying principles of the CFR, we considered those key outcomes. For those who are involved in the teaching program to be fully aware of the CFR and what it means, to critically reflect on their teaching practice and the suitability of the program for the students, and of course to understand its relationship to the CFR. This is what the program looked like before starting the project. They have a very large cohort of students, approximately 6,000 students per year. They do 2 90-minute lessons per week. And the very unique feature of the program is the small class size. There are only 4 students and 1 tutor. Yeah, so this means that students have lots of opportunities to engage in paired and group interactions. And there's 1 assessed spoken activity per lesson, enabling continuous assessment throughout the course. 6,000 students are divided into 6 proficiency levels, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. And there are 2 textbooks per level, alpha and beta, and each lesson covers 2 can-do objectives. They also, so at the time of the research, they also had homework tasks, lesson review tasks, and also they had progress tests called review unit tests after week 5 and week 10. And on top of that, they had pre and post course test using something called WeTech. This pie chart shows how students' grades are determined. So as you can see, 53% of the final grade was determined by this speaking assessment activities. So that's in-class assessment activities. And the 6 levels I referred to earlier were basic, pre-intermediate, intermediate, pre-advanced, advanced, and advanced plus. And they meant to correspond to those levels in the CFR from A2 to C2 and beyond. And it's not only you who got really shocked to see C2 and beyond. Actually, Waseda's tutors and faculty members felt that these levels are not really realistic compared to the actual level of the students and also textbooks. So that was one of the major reasons why they approached us to embark on this joint project. And before doing the research, we looked around and found that, as Fergus and Linda actually noted earlier, the majority of the published work was on assessment, but the CFR is not only about assessment, it is about teaching and learning as well. So the first question we needed to ask was how we can actually link a teaching program to the CFR. So this is the famous vertical dimension of the CFR from A1 to C2, and there's now pre-A1 level. Yeah, vertical dimension. But what we shouldn't forget about is the horizontal aspect of the CFR. in terms of content coverage. So they have this really nice CFR descriptive scheme that we can use to illustrate the content coverage of the program. So we decided to use both vertical and horizontal dimension of the CFR in our projects. And as usual, we follow the procedures recommended by the Council of Europe manual for the linking project: familiarization, specification, standardization, benchmarking, standard setting, and validation. I'm not going into detail here, but we added 2 extra steps. Number 1, prior to the familiarization stage, we asked course tutors to elaborate on the principles under which the course was designed and delivered. Also, they were asked to describe how tasks were developed and used in the course. We devised this template based on questions available in chapters 6 and 7 of the CFR book. And this activity turned out to be very, very fruitful for those teachers to reflect on their teaching practice. And another innovation we made was that as part of the specification stage, when the panel was convened, we had 14 panel members from Japan and the UK. We asked them to review some of the in-class assessment tasks in the textbook and discuss which CFR descriptors, scales, and level would best match the task, each of those tasks. So for example, for this task to introduce yourself and find out your partner, the panelists thought the 3 scales, overall spoken interaction, conversation, and sustained monologue, they thought that these 3 constructs are tapped into by this task. And also they selected these descriptors, like can ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on familiar topics in predictable everyday situations. And those descriptors appeared in A2+ and A2, so they concluded that this task is probably around A2+. So this way, we exploited both vertical and horizontal dimension of the CFR in this project. So now Chihiro is going to share our results and the recommendations.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about what we did and what we found. So using the form Fumiyo just presented, we asked the panelists to look up the assessment tasks in the textbooks and find the relevant scales in the CFR, as well as the levels of the CFR that they thought was most relevant. Now, this is a very brief presentation of the results. So from the basic level to advanced plus, you could see that some of the scales, such as overall spoken interaction and informal discussion, has been covered in all the courses. But then there are other scales that are sort of sporadically covered by other levels. Now, this table, I mean, this distribution itself doesn't really tell us whether it's good or bad. The important question is whether this is actually in line with the students' likely communicative needs, and also whether it's also in line with the goals of the course. And the panelists also picks out the relevant levels. So I'm gonna talk about it a bit later about that. So that's the horizontal content coverage alignment. Now for vertical alignment, what we asked the panelists to do is to watch video recordings from the students, performing these assessment tasks and judge which levels, they were at. And yeah, we basically collected these panelists ratings, and then we used statistical analysis using multifaceted rush modeling in order to order them from the least able student to most able student. Yeah, and in doing that, we also used some video performances that are already calibrated against CFR. And so we knew that from where to where represented B1, relative area represented to the A2, etc. So yeah, this is the summary table. It's a bit difficult to see, but each line represents one performance, so one student. And red color-coded, red are the students that were from the basic course, orange, those from the pre-intermediate, yellow from intermediate, light green, that's pre-advanced, sort of darker green, that's advanced, and blue, finally, that's advanced plus. So if the ratings that's given by the panelists increased as the course levels went up, then we would see the rainbow color transition pattern, yeah, which, yes, great. We see generally, yeah, although you see some misplacements because the yellow cells made its way into a bit of a higher end of the levels, which represents intermediate level, and also some blue, which is the advanced class, which is the highest course level performances, also made its way to sort of lower end of the ability. So we had several misplacements, but yeah, generally you would see the progression. Well, this was good news, but at the same time, if you see the boundaries of the levels, yeah, even the highest advanced plus blue performances went under B1 plus, B2 plus. So it wasn't going up to C1, C2 and above levels. Okay, so very briefly summarizing, so the horizontal alignments that basically covered from basic to advanced plus was A2 to B2 plus. And also just by the performances, actually, it went from below A1 actually to B2 plus. So it actually didn't actually match the intended, original level of the courses. Okay. And in addition to the assessment tasks that were in the textbooks, we also reviewed 4 other elements of the course. So first one was the speaking rating scale that the teachers were using to assess these students in class. So they used to have this 8-point holistic scale, and that was applied, the same one was applied to all the 8 levels. So that covered quite a lot of, levels really. And they also had some vague descriptors such as, fairly successfully performed, so-and-so, some difficulty using, and, a lot of reliance on the textbook expressions, stuff like that. So the panelists basically recommended that, well, why don't you make it into analytic ones? So, there are different categories of performance that they could focus on, such as language, delivery, interaction, task fulfillment. And also, so it doesn't have, they don't have to use the same scales for all the levels. So they should be able to develop, level specific, evidence-based task score and the descriptors that captures the characteristics of performances at one certain course level. Second element was the can-dos, the can-do aim of the each lesson. So there were 2 can-dos for each of the lessons. And for example, they were very, very short. So for example, you would see in the pre-intermediate level, so can-do 1 was just ask for and give advice. This is just a function, language function that's going to be dealt with. And that doesn't really tell us about, okay, so how, are you going to, train your students to be able to ask and give advice and respond to advice? So the recommendations were that can-dos should be revised to have a lot more qualifiers. So activities, what can they actually do on what kind of topics, because topic areas quite differ from level to level. And then, based on what kind of input, producing what kinds of text, and how well can they actually do it. And if there are any restrictions, such as, if the listeners were, sympathetic, or, if the listeners were familiar with the accents, that kind of thing. So a lot of qualifiers, should be incorporated into the can-dos. The third element, that's lesson review tasks, that was the homework, yeah? Then this was written homework, yeah? And there were 2 questions per unit, for example, something like, do you think it is important to learn English? Why or why not? And students would write about this and then, yeah, submit it to the teachers, and the teacher would rate it. And also there was review unit test. That was end of textbook test online, and that was only focusing on vocabulary, grammar, and listening. So, okay, the recommendations were that, why don't you make it into a, series of speaking, homework, spoken homework, because nowadays it's quite easy for students to be able to video record or audio record and, upload it for the teachers to see or listen to. And also discard this review unit test because it's not really relevant to the speaking skills. So that was the recommendations that we came up. So in summary, the content coverage, the horizontal and the vertical alignment, in general, we saw, some coverage of nice content, and the progression of the levels was sort of in line, but we did see some misplacements. And also for other elements of the course, tasks and performances were often judged to be below the intended levels, so they needed revising. And also other course materials to be revised accordingly to better reflect and capture progress. So that was the summary, and I'm going to pass on to Tony. Thank you.
Okay, so first I'll talk you through some of the changes that were made to the program, and then in conclusion, some reflections on how the Common European Framework helped us to work on the curriculum revision. So what changed? Most obviously, we adjusted the expectations. So part of the process was to bring what happened on this course into contact with international standards and expectations of what the Common European Framework levels represent. So you'll find in a lot of programs there's an expectation that year one you're at the basic level, year two you're at the intermediate level, year three you're at the advanced level. And that's how the Common European Framework was initially being applied here. But essentially, as you moved up through the levels of the program, you automatically moved up a Common European Framework level. Now, that was clearly nonsense, and the process made that very clear to everyone as we looked at examples of what a C1 performance looked like, and what a performance in the C1 level of the program looked like. They didn't match. So that changed the number of levels and the kinds of targets that were being set for the program. We also saw that an awful lot was being crammed into the program. So that element of spiraling that Fergus was talking about, that came into the program because we realized that people simply don't. You teach them something one week, they don't automatically gain that. And you can't assume that that is then steadily part of their language repertoire. So you have to recycle, and you have to go more slowly than was planned for in the program. With the idea of the action-oriented approach and the learner as a social agent who is using the language to communicate, we got rid of the lexicogrammatical focus from a lot of the program. So it wasn't all about what grammar point are we learning this week, but what speaking skills are we developing in each session of the program. So we got rid of the written element because it's a spoken focused course, and we replaced the grammar, vocabulary and listening tests with speaking tests. So bringing in this idea of curriculum alignment and the Common European Framework being about the learner at the center and the use of language at the center rather than grammatical, lexicogrammatical knowledge. Related to that, the scales that were used became more focused on interaction and collaboration. Not so much mediation. That wasn't really part of the program. Perhaps in future iterations, that's the direction they'll take it with the shift in the focus. This dates back to before 2018 when the companion volume was first released. We made the can-do statements more specific, so focused on what was actually happening under what kind of conditions, what was it exactly that the learners were doing, and that was connected much more clearly to the kinds of tasks that were involved in the program. So where we had a role-playing activity like this, we would have a can-do statement that focused on what happened in that activity rather than on the grammar or the vocabulary involved in it. Alongside that, the team developed a new, very nice online placement test that involved speaking. And if you're interested, please follow the link and do take a look at that. So drawing some overall conclusions, what did using the Common European Framework in this process do for us? I think two things. One, it did bring this local context into contact with kind of international expectations so that we could much more confidently say that someone who progressed out of this program at B2 level would be viewed as B2 in other contexts and in other parts of the world. I think more importantly, it served as a way to reflect on what the program was doing. So throughout the Common European Framework, you have these nice questions that are posed to the user, asking you to what extent the content of the program and the practices in the program reflect the needs of the learner. So it places the learner at the center of the whole process. And it asks people, when you get people to do this activity, does that reflect their language learning needs beyond the program? So what are we expecting people to be able to do when they've been through this program? And is that something they will need to be able to do? How will it support them in their life? So what we did exemplified one way of relating the CFR to teaching programs. The first time I attempted to, with colleagues, connect a teaching program to the CFR was actually in the mid-1990s. So, and that was in Japan, at a place called Kanda Institute of Foreign Languages. And we were working with a draft version of the Common European Framework. And I think that experience and this experience very clearly illustrate how the Common European Framework can bring together learning at the center with teaching and assessment, and having all of those things work together in what is now called in the Aligning Language Education with the CFR handbook, the comprehensive learning system. So it's where all elements are working together. You don't have a grammar vocabulary focused assessment system working alongside a speaking focused program. And all of these elements, so learner autonomy. Back in the 1990s, when we started introducing the CFR in Japan, it also involved bringing in a an autonomous learning center where students could go and access materials for themselves and would be working towards the same can-do statements that were involved in the program. I think it underlined to us the importance of the horizontal aspect of the CFR. So thinking about what aspects of the language, as described comprehensively in the Common European Framework, which aspects of that actually apply to the learners in this context and in this program. And if the Common European Framework is not comprehensive enough to embrace all of the elements of language learning that seem to be involved in this context, then what additional can-do statements, what additional scales might be needed to capture that? So looking to all of the aspects of interaction, mediation, production, and reception that might be involved for language learners in the context where we are working. And combining that with the vertical perspective given by the scales, okay, what is the target level that these learners can be working towards, and how is that useful for them in their lives outside the program? It led us to review and revise a lot about the program, but used as a tool for reflection. So we weren't saying in order to align to the Common European Framework, you have to do this, this, and this, but asking ourselves the questions that the Common European Framework poses about how is what you are doing serving the best interests of the learners you are working with. And using the Common European Framework in that way, I think really helped us to create or adapt the program in a way that better served the interests of the learners. Okay, so internally to the program, it improved the consistency, the coherence of the program as a whole. Externally, it improved the alignment of the course to expectations held in the wider world and improved the communication between teachers and students. So because we were using these more targeted can-do statements, the learners had a clearer idea of what the expectations were for the activities that they were doing on the course. And I think it was great as a model for collaboration between external groups of researchers who bring the wider perspective of the Common European Framework and teachers who bring the perspective of working with learners. And hopefully, although we were at one remove from that, hopefully bringing in the learners as well into that process of discussing with teachers what it was they were doing and how this connected to their language learning needs beyond the program and what they might be able to do with the language as a result of having been through the program. So hopefully that's given you all some food for thought, and we can stop there and invite questions from the extensive audience online or from in the room.
Yes, we've got several questions online, but in case I forget, please, if you're in the room and you would like to ask a question, bring the mic over to you. But let's start, first of all, with a couple of questions that we got online. First of all, Kathleen asked, did the teachers receive any assessment literacy training as part of this project?
The whole project was, of course, assessment literacy training. I'd say that, yes, but not separately. No, as part of the project, I hope we were developing their assessment literacy, but also learning from them about what they knew about assessment in that context from working with their learners. So it was a mutual process.
Okay, excellent.
Can I just add something?
Please do.
So as Tony just noted, this really functioned really well as their professional development activities. So they really appreciated in joining the research in that way. And actually that was really the beauty of this project. So they were part of the team from the outset of the project. So although the results were not probably what they really expected, so what they thought C2 and beyond turned out to be B2+, but there was no resistance or anything because that was what they found out together with us, not like international experts coming saying that no, your level is B2+. It wasn't like that. So together we found it out. So that was really nice collaboration.
Can you say any more about, we saw that early on in the project, when you looked at the first assessments that you talked about, there was a real disparity between what they thought, what the university thought those level that they thought those tasks were at, and what they were then subsequently rated as. So can you tell us just a little bit, so who was doing that rating? Was that all of you and the teachers at the university? And did you get any sense of why that kind of disparity existed?
So the panelists consisted of Waseda tutors and also faculty members, as well as us and UK experts. So it was really a mixture of those groups. And the reason why they approached us was that they actually knew that those targets were not realistic. So it was okay, wasn't it? They expected this to happen, but they wanted more concrete evidence, sufficient evidence to establish the new the revised program. So in that sense, it was okay. And here, do you want to say?
Yeah, just adding to that. So I think as far as I understood, the upper levels textbooks were kind of later developed in addition to the original core series. And for that levels to be, at the higher end, it kind of had to be named as, aiming at C1, C2. And that's actually not uncommon because, if you don't work very closely with, CFR to start with, you don't really have much idea of, okay, is this really C1, C2? So yeah, that was where the discrepancy came from. So, not really knowing that much about CFR and the need for demonstrating, I guess, internally to students that you're making progress, and also, the university board needs to see that as well. So yeah, all of that factors came in. But yeah, as Fumi said, the teachers were not really feeling that, is this really up to that? So yeah, all of that kind of came together in this project. So yeah, we kind of solved that. Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. I have another question online before I'll check to see whether anybody in the room. A question from Nick, who's asking, was the assessment of students CEFR level holistic, or was it focused on particular scales, i.e. Standard setting type activities?
Yeah, so in order to make judgments about the students' performances, they referred to different scales of the CFR and then made an overall judgment. Yeah, of the overall levels, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So it wasn't
quite holistic as it sounds like. Yeah,
broken according to both those horizontal and those vertical dimensions that you mentioned on the CEFR. Lovely, thank you. I think I've got what that question was asking. Okay, thank you very much for that presentation, which was excellent.